The cosmos is vast, and within its immeasurable volume, an unsettling pattern is emerging. The appearance of objects that defy our most established scientific principles. There is a mystery unfolding in outer space as we speak. We have a name for this mystery. We call it 3I Atlas, officially designated 3I Atlas, following the classification system for interstellar visitors. But that doesn't mean we actually know what it is or what it's doing. 3I Atlas is weird. It looks weird. It moves weird. It's made of weird stuff. And for all of the time that we've spent studying this object, there is a new indication that it might have actually been studying us for even longer. The very existence of objects like 3I Atlas forces us to confront the fact that our local stellar neighborhood, the solar system, is not a perfectly sealed bubble. We are porous to the greater galaxy, and this interstellar flow is bringing in material that fundamentally challenges our understanding of cosmic chemistry and dynamics. The arrival of these interstellar objects, beginning with the enigmatic Oumuamua in 2017, marked a paradigm shift in astronomy. Before then, such visitors were only theoretical. Now, with 3I Atlas as the third confirmed traveler, the anomalies are accumulating, and the scientific community is grappling with what this truly means for planetary science. And, perhaps, the search for extraterrestrial technology. Let's begin with some recent images of 3I Atlas that were captured by astrophotographers in the remote desert of Namibia on the southern tip of Africa. This is already an incredibly dark place on Earth, chosen by astronomers for its minimal light pollution and pristine atmospheric conditions. But the photographers were able to take advantage of a lunar eclipse where the shadow of the Earth blocked out any sunlight from reflecting off the moon, essentially creating the darkest sky possible, and therefore the clearest view into outer space. This brief period of absolute cosmic darkness provided a crucial window for high-fidelity observation, removing the contaminating glare of scattered light that often plagues deep sky photography. During this time, they could have pointed their cameras at anything, but they chose to locate 3I Atlas in their viewfinder, and what they saw was shocking. The object was glowing bright green in the night sky. This visual spectacle was breathtaking, an emerald ghost streaking across the starfield. But to a seasoned astronomer, it was a profound chemical paradox. Now, based on what we know about 3I Atlas, it should not be turning green. Or, at least, there is no natural explanation right now for it to be green. The color green in a comet is rarely a simple cosmetic feature. It is a signature of highly specific, high-energy molecular processes. You see, the prevailing theory among scientists and astronomers is that 3I Atlas is an interstellar comet, meaning it's generally the same as all of the other comets we see flying around. It has a big, bright, fuzzy halo of gas and dust around it. That's the coma. And it also has a big fan-shaped tail as well. This general morphology, the distinct head and tail structure, is what initially led to its classification as a comet, suggesting it contains volatile materials that sublime, transition from solid to gas when heated by the sun. But this comet is also different because this one came from a totally different star system in some far-off place in the galaxy. This alien origin story is the key to its potential strangeness. Formed in an unknown stellar nursery, around a different type of star, and in a unique protoplanetary disk, its composition should reflect an entirely different chemical history than the comets native to our own Kuiper Belt, or Oort cloud. So, we are expecting it to be a little weird. But the problem with 3I Atlas is that it keeps doing things that just don't make sense. To truly grasp the magnitude of the green glow mystery, one must first appreciate the intricate photochemistry of a typical comet. For example, It's not actually unusual for a comet to turn green. And because this is pretty normal, we know a lot about the chemical process that creates the green color. It happens when carbon molecules in the coma are exposed to ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Specifically, this happens to diatomic carbon, or C2, which is just two carbon atoms that are bonded to each other. The C2 molecule is highly volatile and unstable, a short-lived radical that is crucial for the green spectral emission. When solar ultraviolet radiation hits the C2 in the coma, it excites the electron orbitals of the molecule. As the electrons drop back down to a lower energy state, they release a photon of light at a very specific wavelength, which our eyes perceive as a vibrant emerald green. The process is a finely tuned celestial clockwork. C2 is usually produced when more complex organic molecules like acetylene or ethane are broken down by solar radiation, a process called photodissociation, close to the comet's nucleus. The resulting C2 then fluoresces green. Critically, C2 itself is very fragile. It is broken apart into individual carbon atoms, photodissociated by solar radiation within a matter of days or hours. Because of this rapid breakdown, the green color is almost exclusively observed in the coma, the area immediately surrounding the nucleus. The tail, which consists of more widely dispersed material that has traveled further, is typically blue from ionized carbon monoxide, CO+, or white from dust. So, if 3I Atlas were a normal comet, it would have a lot of these carbon structures around its surface, and it would turn green in the sunlight. But we know from observations that were made over the summer using pretty much every major telescope in existence that 3I Atlas is actually deficient in these carbon chain molecules. High-resolution spectrographic analysis, which measures the light emitted across the electromagnetic spectrum, has failed to find the distinctive spectral lines of C2 at the expected intensity. It doesn't have any C2, and yet it is clearly glowing green. So why is that happening? This is the central chemical conundrum. The necessary ingredient for the most common green phenomenon is missing, yet the phenomenon itself is visually striking. We don't know. Aliens? Yeah, maybe they just like green lights. While a provocative thought, the scientific imperative is to exhaust all potential natural explanations first, even the most exotic, before conceding the possibility of an engineered source. The idea that a completely unknown interstellar molecule could be fluorescing at the same specific green wavelength is an astronomical longshot, but technically remains on the table. The composition of 3I Atlas's coma, even beyond the green anomaly, presents a catalog of chemical peculiarities that defy the expectations set by 2 decades of cometary study. Now, we also know that the coma surrounding 3I Atlas is filled with CO2, which is carbon bonded to oxygen atoms, and that is a totally different thing from C2. It does make the object incredibly bright, but that would not turn it green. And the presence of that much CO2 alone is also pretty strange because it vastly outweighs the amount of H2O, or water vapor, in the coma, which is basically the opposite of an average comet because they typically have a lot more water than CO2. The dominance of carbon dioxide, CO2, over water, H2O, is highly significant. In our solar system, comets formed beyond the snow line are overwhelmingly dominated by water ice, which is the most abundant volatile. CO2, or dry ice, is a hypervolatile that sublimates much further from the sun than water. The 3I Atlas coma, therefore, is behaving more like a massive icy lump of dry ice that has rapidly vaporized its most unstable components. This leads to 2 major, unsettling conclusions. First, the region of space where 3I Atlas formed must have had a profoundly different chemical gradient than our own protoplanetary disk, with CO2 ice being significantly more abundant than H2O ice at the comet's formation radius. This suggests a parent star with a different spectral type, possibly colder, or a unique process in the accretion disk that altered the condensation points of these key molecules. Second, the high CO2 abundance implies a tremendous level of activity for the comet, even when far from the Sun. As CO2 boils off, it blasts gas and dust into space, making the comet bright but also leading to the next major anomaly: the presence of heavy metallic elements. Except that's not the only weird thing in the coma of 3I Atlas, because it's also full of metal, particularly nickel. And again, this is not exactly unusual for a comet, but it is weird for 3I Atlas to be doing it right now. A lot of comets have metal in their composition, and often that metal will end up evaporating out into the coma. But this only ever happens when the comet gets incredibly close to the Sun, where there's enough heat to vaporize metal. Metal vaporization is a temperature-dependent process governed by the metal's specific boiling point. Nickel, a dense transition metal, requires extremely high temperatures, often above 1000 degrees Celsius, to transition into a gaseous state. For a solar system comet, these temperatures are only achieved in the inner reaches of the system, closer to the Sun than the orbit of Mercury. The energy required to break the molecular bonds of nickel dust and turn it into a gas is monumental, and it is traditionally considered an observable phenomenon only in what are known as sun grazing or near-Sun comets. 3I Atlas is not close to the Sun, and the presence of nickel was first detected when it was still out in between Mars and Jupiter. At the orbital distance between Mars and Jupiter, the average temperature is far too low to sublime water ice, let alone vaporize nickel. The detected gaseous nickel atoms, identified through their distinctive absorption lines against the solar spectrum, represent an energy input that current solar irradiation at that distance simply cannot provide. So there's no reasonable explanation as to why it's releasing a bunch of metal, specifically nickel. The conundrum deepens because the nickel emission is not a subtle hint. It is a clear, definitive spectroscopic signature. Astronomers have ruled out instrumental error and contamination. The nickel is there, in gaseous form, and the solar heat required to generate it is definitively. This has led to intense speculation about exotic chemical reactions or internal heat sources within the comet. Perhaps a highly porous structure allows solar radiation to penetrate deeper and heat the core, or maybe a localized, short-lived nuclear reaction is somehow taking place. But the most disruptive hypothesis circles back to the non-natural engineered origin. Unless you were to entertain the theory that 3I Atlas is an alien spacecraft, in which case rocket engines are typically made from metal alloys that are high in nickel content. In human-engineered aerospace and propulsion systems, nickel-based superalloys, such as Inconel or Hastalloy, are the materials of choice for combustion chambers, turbines, and rocket nozzles, due to their incredible resistance to extreme heat and pressure. And when you burn those engines, a lot of nickel tends to end up in the exhaust gas. A lot of CO2 as well. The simultaneous anomalous presence of massive CO2 outgassing and high-temperature nickel vapor far from the Sun creates a perfect, albeit circumstantial fingerprint for an advanced propulsion system, potentially one using a highly efficient, high-energy chemical or nuclear thermal drive that expels both gaseous carbon compounds and trace amounts of ablated nozzle material. Of course, this probably isn't aliens. The scientific community, adhering to the principle of Occam's razor, rightly demands that all natural, if bizarre, explanations be exhausted before invoking extraterrestrial technology. But there's also something weird happening with the way that 3I Atlas is moving through the solar system, probably unrelated to rocket engines that may or may not exist. The key to the movement anomaly is the absence of a force that should be present in a comet, a phenomenon known as non-gravitational acceleration, which is directly tied to the sublimation of its icy components. But what's interesting is the trajectory and velocity of 3I Atlas has remained almost perfectly consistent for the entire time that we've been observing it. Since the object was first spotted in early May up until right now in October, it has not sped up, slowed down, or changed direction by any meaningful amount. That might not sound weird, but if this were a comet, then it should be moving around a lot more. To understand the significance of this steady course, one must understand the physics of cometary motion. An object moving through the solar system is primarily governed by the sun's gravity, its orbital path, determined by the elegant mathematics of Newtonian mechanics. However, comets introduce a complication. You see, comets heat up as they approach the sun, which causes them to melt, or technically to sublimate, which is what happens when a solid transitions directly into a gas, and the release of that gas tends to push the comet around in space, like a thruster. These thrusters are the jets of gas and dust blasting off the nucleus as the ice rapidly turns to vapor. Because the ice is rarely distributed perfectly symmetrically, these jets are almost always asymmetric, creating a tiny but persistent thrust that pushes the comet off its purely gravitational path. This measurable deviation from a purely gravitational orbit is the non-gravitational acceleration, NGA. So, a typical comet will change velocity and direction depending on what side is being exposed to the sun. We call that movement non-gravitational acceleration, or NGA. And we typically measure the average distance of variation that occurs in one day. The magnitude of NGA is a direct proxy for the cometary activity. A highly active comet, like those rich in water ice, exhibits high NGA as the powerful water vapor jets push it significantly. Even a moderately active comet shows daily variations that can be mapped and accounted for by astronomers. As we've seen, 3I Atlas has been doing a lot of sublimating already, including a mini-tail that formed in the direction of the sun, which has now begun to evolve into a longer tail that is facing away from the sun. The formation of the coma and the tail itself is definitive proof of sublimation. Gas and dust are clearly being ejected from the nucleus, and yet, on a daily basis, the velocity and trajectory of 3I Atlas has only fluctuated by about 1.5 kilometers of NGA per day. This is where the high CO2 composition and the low NGA motion create a devastating contradiction for standard cometary models. A high CO2 content means high activity. High activity means massive outgassing. Massive outgassing should produce significant jetting. Significant jetting must result in high NGA. The observation of massive outgassing, the bright coma tail, the high CO2 nickel, coupled with near zero NGA, is a cosmic physics anomaly of the highest order. Let's compare that with 2I Borisov, the most normal of the interstellar trio. It was measured to fluctuate over 100 kilometers per day, about 100 times more movement on average than Atlas. Borisov, which was much more H2O rich, behaved exactly as an active comet should, with powerful asymmetric jets creating significant daily deviations from its predicted course. Now, one potential explanation would be that Atlas is bigger and therefore harder to move. Makes sense. But we can bring in another point of comparison. This is Hale-Bopp. It's one of the biggest comets we've ever discovered in our solar system, at least as big as 3I Atlas, if not much bigger. we saw Hale-Bopp move around by an average of over 10 kilometers of NGA per day. Again, around 10 times more than Atlas. Hale-Bopp, due to its immense size and high activity, required constant non-gravitational modeling to track accurately. Its sheer mass was offset by the tremendous force of its powerful asymmetrical jets, and Oumuamua blows them all away. At some points, it was changing direction by over 1,000 kilometers per day. Oumuamua's non-gravitational acceleration was so extreme and bizarre that its original classification as an asteroid had to be immediately upgraded to a comet-like object, despite having no visible coma or tail. Its NGA was the primary evidence for its non-gravitational propulsion, and the source of that propulsion remains one of the greatest mysteries in modern astronomy. So, even when compared to other interstellar objects, 3I Atlas is moving in a very strange way. It's holding such an unusually steady course that you could almost say it's intentional, as if it's being guided through the solar system. This almost perfect, linear trajectory, despite its intense internal activity, implies a level of precision and control that is fundamentally counterintuitive to the chaotic physics of a tumbling, sublimating ice ball. If a natural explanation is to be found, it requires a mechanism that generates massive, consistent outgassing to explain the brightness, but simultaneously ensures that the thrust generated is perfectly symmetrical across the comet's rotation, canceling out all NGA. This would require either a perfectly uniform, rapidly spinning spherical nucleus, which is highly unlikely for a body that has undergone a violent interstellar journey, or a highly directed, focused counterthrust that actively cancels out the natural jetting, a highly engineered solution. Now, there's probably a natural explanation for that, but let's just say that if 3I Atlas is a ship that is being steered, then not only can it hold a course, but it could theoretically also change course whenever it wants. Right now, we expect that 3I Atlas will end up being on the opposite side of the Sun from the Earth as it passes through the inner solar system. So, we won't have an opportunity to see it up close, or it won't have a chance to see us, unless somehow 3I Atlas is able to slow itself down as it passes by the Sun, and we find it waiting for us on the other side. The prospect of a controlled deceleration, a deliberate braking maneuver to remain within the habitable zone of our solar system, elevates the object from an anomaly to a potential threat or a scheduled visitation. The precision required for such a maneuver, especially considering the object's observed resistance to NGA, is astronomical, far exceeding current human technological capability for a mission of this scale. This thought experiment, the idea of a scheduled slowdown, forces us to consider the possibility that 3I Atlas is not merely a hunk of exotic wandering ice, but a long-duration interstellar artifact on a mission to study the only G-class star with a planet known to host a civilization. The final and most compellingly eerie piece of circumstantial evidence linking 3I Atlas to a possible engineered origin is its connection to the most famous and still unexplained extraterrestrial signal ever recorded. Here's a crazy theory for you that might actually hold some water. Have you ever heard of the WOW signal? It was discovered in 1977 by astronomers at Ohio State University who were using something called the Big Ear radio telescope. It's like a big ear that listens for weird stuff in space. And on this one day, it found something so weird that the person reading the data just wrote the word WOW on the paper printout, hence the name. The Big Ear Radio Observatory was one of the early pioneers of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI. On August 15, 1977, the telescope picked up a 72-second-long burst of radio waves so intense, so pure, and so narrowly focused on a single frequency that it immediately stood out from the cacophony of cosmic noise. What shocked them so much was this incredibly powerful, narrowband radio signal that lasted for 72 seconds and originated from a point deep in outer space. We know that it didn't come from any of our technology. It didn't come from the sun or any planet in our solar system. We only know that it came from the general direction of the constellation Sagittarius. Specifically, the signal originated from the direction of the globular cluster M55, which is located in the Sagittarius constellation. The signal was not a wide-band hiss characteristic of natural astrophysical phenomena, like pulsars or quasars. It was a pure, narrow spike of energy, exactly the kind of signal one would expect from a technologically advanced, intentional broadcast. Now, the first thing that stands out about the WOW signal is the incredible amount of energy it would have required to blast out a narrowband radio frequency across interstellar space. If it was made by aliens, then they would have to be a civilization so advanced that they could harness the energy of a star. The sheer power required, if the signal was an isotropic broadcast, sent equally in all directions, is truly staggering, suggesting a Type 2 civilization on the Kardashev scale. Or if it was a natural phenomenon, then it must have been created by some kind of activity inside a star. Despite decades of searching, no known natural phenomenon produces a signal with the precise characteristics of the WOW signal. Now, the second important thing about the WOW signal has to do with hydrogen, which is the most abundant atom in the known universe. And there's this thing called the hydrogen line. It's a radio frequency that gets created by hydrogen atoms. That's a big simplification, but all you need to know is that the frequency of the hydrogen line is 1420 MHz. And the frequency of the WOW signal, you guessed it, 1420 MHz. The choice of 1420 MHz is profoundly significant. This frequency, the hydrogen line, is the neutral atomic hydrogen emission line. It is the most universally recognized frequency in the cosmos, a common denominator in the universal language of physics. It is the natural radio wave, a fingerprint of the most basic element. The 1420 MHz band is often called the cosmic water hole, an assumed quiet channel that any intelligent civilization anywhere in the galaxy would know to use for an interstellar message, as it avoids interference from natural cosmic processes. So, if you were trying to send a very simple message into the galaxy in a way that any other civilization with advanced knowledge of science would recognize, that's probably how you would do it. And in the 5 decades since then, we have never detected another radio signal that has looked anything like that. Repeated surveys of the Sagittarius region, including targeted deep dives, have all failed to recapture the fleeting 72-second moment of cosmic communication, solidifying its status as an unparalleled and isolated event. Anyway, the reason why this is interesting is because astronomers have been able to reverse engineer the trajectory of 3I Atlas, and we're pretty sure that it also comes from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, the same general direction of the WOW signal. The orbital path of 3I Atlas is an unguided hyperbolic trajectory that, when traced back, originated from the direction of the galactic plane within the constellation Sagittarius. While not pinpointing the exact star system responsible, the general alignment with the WOW signal's origin is a coincidence too compelling to dismiss out of hand. That is a pretty big coincidence, and it's got some people thinking that maybe the real origin of the WOW signal wasn't some distant star, but it might have come from our new visitor, 3I Atlas, which in the year 1977 would have been on the outer edge of our solar system, far beyond the orbit of Pluto. Maybe it just wanted to give us a heads up that it was on the way. This precursor signal theory is a chilling and highly provocative interpretation of the data. If 3I Atlas is an engineered object, a probe or vessel, then it would have been at the periphery of our solar system in 1977. A short duration, high-power broadcast at the universal hailing frequency of 1420 centimeters would be an ideal method for an advanced probe to announce its presence or transmit a large burst of data back to its originators before proceeding to its primary mission objective, which may be closer to the Sun. The brief 72-second duration of the signal is precisely what one would expect from a directed, narrow beam communication from a moving source, rather than a continuous, isotropic broadcast from a fixed star. The possibility that we not only detected an alien message decades ago, but that the sender is now physically in our midst, studying us from an unnaturally stable orbit, is a scenario lifted directly from the most compelling science fiction. Of course, that is just a theory, one that hasn't been proven to be true, and probably never will be. But it also hasn't been proven to be false either. And that's probably the most important thing to keep in mind as we learn more about 3I Atlas. The current scientific method is in a state of crisis with multiple lines of evidence: the baffling green glow, the unexplained metal vapor, the unnaturally steady course, and the eerie spectral and directional link to the WOW signal, all converging on explanations that violate established cometary physics. The challenge posed by 3I Atlas is not just a scientific curiosity. It is a fundamental challenge to our cosmic self-conception. If the universe is filled with such objects capable of traversing interstellar distances and bearing chemical and kinetic signatures that mimic, yet far exceed, the potential of our own technology, then the implications for the Fermi paradox, the great silence of the cosmos, are profound. Perhaps the silence is not a sign of absence, but a sign of a highly advanced controlled presence that is only now being incidentally detected. Objects like this one demand that we keep an open mind to the endless possibilities of the universe. The truth is out there, and it's headed in our direction. This third interstellar visitor has shattered the illusion of a predictable solar system, opening a Pandora's box of questions about the origins of matter, the universality of physical laws, and the nature of intelligence beyond Earth. Our ability to process the reality of 3I Atlas, to scientifically, rationally, and emotionally accept that we may be dealing with something far beyond our current understanding, is the next great leap for our species. If you're ready to explore the cosmos' deepest secrets, hit that like button and subscribe to Stellify Science for more mind-bending discoveries. Don't miss what's next